Flags, the podcast where we spot the green flags, wave the red ones, and occasionally get lost in the footnotes. I'm Yelena, your resident audiobook addict, and joining me is my co-host Sam, a true book reader extraordinaire.
Hey. How's it going, Yelena? It's been a while. Read anything interesting lately?
It has been a while, and no, I have not read too much because I've been deep diving in the self-writer's journey by writing my own book, and I'm finding it very hard to get any time to do so.
I mean, you're also juggling a full-time job. I can't imagine that you have much time on your hands.
Yes, I mean, I think we both don't have a lot of time, and that is an apology to any of our listeners because it has been a long time since we have recorded. But we are here. You're listening to us now.
We're back on track.
And
We're back on track.
Okay, we're back on track.
It's important to keep the fans happy.
Exactly. And we appreciate you all very, very much.
Thank you for your patience with us.
What have you been up to?
Well, I'm nothing if not a bandwagon girly. I love me a good hype train. And in this context, it's probably better to call it a hype ship, really, because I finally decided to crack open the Odyssey. I don't know if you know much about the Odyssey, but effectively there was an ancient Greek poet by the name of Homer, I should say, and he had two epic poems that he created, or epic stories.
Yeah.
One is called the Iliad, the other is called the Odyssey. And the Iliad talks about the Trojan War and the fall of the city of Troy. And Trojan horse may come to mind for some of our listeners.
Yeah.
The Trojan horse was a device that was created, or I guess invented, by Odysseus. And Odysseus was one of the generals in that war. And he came up with an idea to hide all of his people, or at least a good chunk of the army, inside a wooden horse, presented as a gift to the Spartans in Troy. And then, well, when they invariably bring the wooden horse into the bounds of their reinforced castle walls, well, you can imagine what would happen to them after that.
Yeah. Hello, this is Yelena from the future, and I need to interrupt this part of the podcast as Sam would like to profusely apologise for getting a pronunciation wrong. So let's all have a laugh with her and reassure her that this is not the most mortifying thing and that the world is in fact not ending. So when she says Telemachus, she really meant to say Telemachus. Apologies to Tom Holland. And yeah, that is all. That is the only thing that happened. Back to the episode.
The Odyssey, on the other hand, takes place after the fall of Troy and marks Odysseus's return back to his hometown of Ithaca. That particular journey is a long one. It takes him 10 years to get back home, and he faces unimaginable creatures, dangers, and I guess adventures along the way to get there.
Yeah.
And it's very good timing because the Odyssey has just been redesigned, I guess, or reimagined by Christopher Nolan as a new movie that has come out this weekend. And I cannot wait. It's been very hard to get tickets.
Yes, I think because only a few cinemas around the world actually can play it correctly. So any of those places have been booked out, but it is a long film, I hear.
Yeah, nearly 3 hours long.
Yeah. But it does look epic and sounds epic and is probably a great watch. So
It's a star-studded cast, right? You've got Matt Damon as Odysseus. You've got Tom Holland as Odysseus' son, Telemachus. Zendaya is Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom. It goes on and on.
So star cast, it has to be an amazing film.
Correct.
All right, well, shall we get into today's book pick? And would you like to introduce that for us?
Thank you very much. I'd love to. Today's book pick is Katabasis by R.F. Kuang. Rebecca F. Kuang is a highly acclaimed Chinese-American author. She started writing her first book, The Poppy War, aged just 19.
Oh, wow.
And it was published before she turned 22. Now, at the age of 30, she has published 6 best-selling novels that span across quite a few different genres, and that is a topic that I think we should discuss today. But broadly, you can kind of characterize it as dark academia, high fantasy, contemporary satire. 2 of those books have been optioned for movie adaptations.
Cool.
I think it's one, but may actually be 2 of her books have also topped the New York Times bestsellers list in 2022. She has a Nebula Award, which is a very prestigious award for science fiction and fantasy books. And her academic career is just as illustrious as her writing one. Katabasis is a somewhat divisive and polarizing book, though. Definitely, it's clear that her experience working and studying in academia has served as an inspiration for the book. But if you look at the scores that we've got so far, you have a 3.7 out of 5 on Goodreads, but a 4 out of 5 on Amazon.
Yep.
And you read it on Audible. Did you have any stats for us?
Yeah, so it got a 3.8 out of 5 on Audible, and that's about 112 reviews collectively. And Audible will do performance and story sort of reviews. So it got a 4 in performance, which is more to do about the voice actors.
Correct.
And then it got a 3.7 for the actual story, which is on par with the Goodreads one.
Correct. So it's a book that not everyone has received very well.
Yeah.
Some people have absolutely loved it. Some people have absolutely hated it.
Yes.
Why don't we jump into giving it a 2-sentence summary, though?
Okay, so forget curing an illness. Magic can't possibly do that. Instead, opt in for resurrection. That's much easier. Unless you're a cat. If you're a cat, you can just walk in and out of the Underworld like it's a Tuesday.
Yep, that's perfect. Actually, I love that.
I did like making this one.
Thank you. And I think it, without going into spoilers, it also starts to tell us a little bit about some of the criticisms of this book. But before we launch into the details, talk me through some trigger warnings, because there are a few.
There are a few for this, and of course, for anyone who finds this too intense, you feel free to skip listening to this and listen to one of our other podcasts.
Episodes.
Yeah, episodes in the past or in the future. But so we've got things like sexual harassment, suicidal thoughts, assault, death, and explicitly child death, which is a bit more intense, eating disorders, torture, gaslighting, misogyny, mental illness, animal cruelty.
Yeah, the list goes on, hey.
Yeah, there's probably some that we've missed there, but there are intense topics in this book.
Correct. Look, I am known for having a very relatively low tolerance towards some of these triggers. I did get a little squeamish during the torture scenes.
Yeah.
So, look, if you are anyone like me, then there might be some chapters that you skim through really quickly because you don't actually want to read that bit.
Yeah, and we should also caveat that this book is very dense in its research and complex topics. So there's a lot that is very hard to understand, I think, as well.
Correct. So we've got to be careful here, because in the same way that I definitely skimmed through some of the more, let's call them violent sections, I did find myself skimming through some of the really complex philosophical concepts that the book introduces, I should say. And as a consequence, while we may have opinions about the book and where we think there might be some plot holes or plot gaps, we've got to be cognizant of the fact that those gaps might actually just be a reflection of the fact that we didn't fully understand some of these concepts.
Yes, correct.
I think there's a second caveat too, and that is that there's so much in this book to discuss. I think it's nearly 600 pages long.
It's a massive book.
590 or 580 if I'm not misremembering.
Yeah.
There are so many topics. We went through draft after draft after draft of the different subject matters or topics or themes or ideas that we could discuss, and we just can't cover all of them.
Yeah.
So we actually even contemplated doing a double episode for a while.
We did, but I'm also like, nope, we need to stick to one.
Yes, correct. We need to give ourselves enough time to be able to do the next episode and also be able to talk more succinctly through the topics that actually matter.
Exactly.
So, Yelena, do you want to give us a bit of a plot summary of what happens in Katabasis?
Yes, so we've got Alice Law, who is our main protagonist, and she is a Cambridge postgraduate student studying analytic magick, and that is magic with a K. And she accidentally kills her highly influential thesis advisor, Professor Jacob Grimes, in a botched spell. And so, desperate to retrieve his soul from hell, simply to just get a recommendation letter that will secure her academic future, Alice sacrifices half her lifespan to get to hell and open a portal. During this journey, she is begrudgingly joined on this descent by her academic rival, Peter Murdoch, and also the department's cat, Archimedes, who just casually seems to wander this veil in and out of hell.
Yeah, no idea how that works. But to be honest, there's a lot about the magic system itself that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
And might explain why Archimedes can walk in and out of hell with ease. Because the system is effectively based on paradoxes. And the rule is that if a magician can convince themselves that a paradox is true, then it becomes true. So it effectively is an illusion, right?
It's quite an interesting one because I sort of enjoy the fact that magic is truly a magician's trick.
Yeah.
It's not
A party
magic
trick.
how we know with other things, and they do call themselves magicians, like
Correct.
not wizards, not something else,
Correct.
and it sticks with that, and I find that quite interesting.
I agree. Now, the search for Professor Grimes takes Alice and Peter all over the Underworld, and they navigate this ever-changing landscape. I don't want to go into too much detail about that landscape because it is one of the themes and ideas that we want to talk about later in our episode. But along the way, they battle rival magicians. They meet the spirit of a former student who had died by suicide to escape Grimes. And they're forced to confront the reality that their advisor was quite abusive. They're also forced to start to confront their feelings for each other. But while their rivalry begins to convert and change and shift towards that of a romance, just as they reach that crescendo, they stumble into a trap, and Peter sacrifices himself to the Underworld so that Alice can escape.
Spoiler alert.
Oh, true.
That's fine. And then as we get past that point, Alice then starts navigating the deeper parts of hell herself, the city of Dis, and manages to outsmart her enemies and trick them into the river Lethe, which erases your identities permanently. She also, through this journey, finds something called a true contradiction, or the dialetheia, which is a very powerful object to find, and as she reaches the court's Underworld's ruler, Lord Yama, she's able to make a bargain with him by presenting this dialetheia to him. And at this point in her journey, she's more understanding, I guess, what she wants out of life
What's
and
important to her.
what's important to her. And in the ultimate act of defiance, instead of choosing to save Professor Grimes,
And therefore save her academic future.
she barters him and his soul to resurrect Peter. Yama accepts this deal and even gives them back half of their lifespan that they bartered to get down there. And Alice and Peter reunite, they share a kiss, and then they begin their journey back up to the surface world. So this journey into hell and back is a very good segue into the themes and ideas of this book. So would you like to start us off in that?
Thank you so much. I would love to, and I'm super excited to talk about this one. So basically, a common template for fantasy stories is this concept called the hero's journey. And I think it's important for us to understand the hero's journey in order for us to understand why this book is called Katabasis. So the term hero's journey was coined by a mythologist called Joseph Campbell. He'd written a seminal book in 1949 called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And in that book, he'd synthesized centuries of mythology and religion and folklore. And he argued that when you put aside all of the minutiae and cultural specificity of each of these stories, underpinning all of those stories lies a single structural pattern. And he called that pattern a monomyth. And that monomyth is that a hero would venture forth from his comfort world into a region of foreign, forbidden, unknown realms, and then he will be victorious in a series of adventures and crises before coming home changed and transformed. This particular journey, this hero's journey, is something that he considers to be a common template of stories, or particularly adventure stories. And he goes into quite a lot of detail to describe the multiple stages that a hero's journey has. In fact, he says that there are 17 different stages. At the risk of boring everyone about each of those stages, they can roughly be categorized into 3 acts or 3 arcs. The first arc is the arc of separation. The protagonist is severed from their ordinary life, and they often cross either a literal or a symbolic threshold of an unfamiliar territory. The second act is initiation. This is where your hero encounters a series of trials. He or she may undergo a kind of almost symbolic death, and they achieve this moment of profound self-actualization, realization, illumination, and then they return back in the third act, back to their original community and bring back this significant boon or this object of immense value, whether it's knowledge or whether it's medicine or whether it's a specific object that revitalizes not just himself, but also that community. As part of that third step, this hero has now mastered what we would call freedom from the fear of death. And that in turn becomes freedom to live.
Yeah.
In other words, they have learned to live in the moment rather than anticipating the future or regretting the past. Katabasis is a very specific type of a hero's journey. And it's based off of the ancient Greek word kata, meaning descent, and or down, I should say, and baino, which is to go. And the idea being a descent where you go into the underworld is katabasis.
That is actually very interesting because I never really knew where the title of the book came from, because it's a magic-based book. I was like, oh, it could be anything. And authors do think about their titles quite well before, you know, making them. But I didn't realize it was a literal just descent into the
underworld.
Yeah.
Correct. It's specifically called the process of descending into the underworld and coming back alive, right?
Yeah.
And Katabasis is a world or a trope where the place, the unknown realm, is the underworld, is death, is Hades' realm, right?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of famous examples of Katabasises in Greek mythology. So you may be familiar with the myth of Orpheus. He enters the underworld in order to bring back his lover Eurydice back to the world of the living. Odysseus,
yes,
call
the
out
movie.
to thank you.
Foreshadow.
Correct. Odysseus, he travels to Hades as well, to the underworld, in order to consult with a prophet to find a safe passage back to Ithaca. Essentially, this ability to enter the realm of the dead while you're still alive and then return back home still alive is proof of this hero's exceptional status. They're more than just a mortal. They have defeated death in the context of that hero's journey.
Yes.
Early fantasy books drew a lot of inspiration from these mythologies. And so for at least a long time, to my knowledge and to my understanding, the hero's journey was the dominant blueprint for fantasy stories, especially high fantasy stories. A really good example is, and I often bring this one up because it's just such a well-known fantasy story, would be J.R. Tolkien's, right? The Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
It is a perfect example of a monomyth. Frodo Baggins undergoes a literal separation when he leaves the Shire. He undergoes an initiation while he confronts various challenges in his journey to Mordor. And when he returns back to the Shire, he's a changed man. He's maybe psychologically fractured, but he's also wiser, and he has a deeper understanding about the world and what's important.
And I guess also in that same aspect, he's not afraid to leave the Shire anymore.
That's correct.
Because that was a big thing at the start.
That's correct. And those who have read the book, and I think it's also the case in the movie, ultimately he does not fear death either, which is really important to call out. George Lucas explicitly and famously said that he had relied on Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces as a blueprint for him to write Star Wars. So it's not just fantasy books, it can also kind of translate to sci-fi and space fantasies as well. However, this trope is becoming less and less common in modern fantasies. It is not without its criticisms. And we could have a whole episode just about the criticisms as to a hero's journey as a concept. But at least for the purposes of brevity, in the context of Katabasis, we've got to be really careful about calling it a pure hero's journey.
Yeah, correct.
And there are two reasons for this. The first is that I think, quite importantly, Katabasis's descent into the underworld isn't a noble or mythic purpose. The object of immense value that they want to get. I mean, look, it's a recommendation letter, right?
Yeah.
And if anything, it's kind of reduces this journey to something that's quite mundane and a bit self-oriented
Yeah.
rather than something that's going to save the world,
You
right?
feel like there's a little bit of guilt there maybe for the actual death, but otherwise it's like death happens all the time as well. Even, and it's known in their world that accidents like this happen all the time.
Correct.
So it's not really seen as the most awful thing that's ever happened.
Correct. So in that case, this feels quite a bit self-serving,
Yeah.
more than anything else. Or maybe self-serving is a bit harsh. If nothing else, this is a character or a set of characters that are just trying to survive a system that's quite toxic,
Yes.
rather than anything else. I think the second reason why it's difficult to directly overlay a hero's journey in the context of Katabasis is because I was actually quite fortunate to be able to listen to R.F. Kuang speak at the Melbourne Writers' Festival. And she was very clear that she doesn't like to label herself as a fantasy author or a romance author. She quite likes this idea of Frankenstein genres.
Yeah.
And in this case, she had expressed that there were 2, maybe 3 inspirations for Katabasis. The first is Dante's Inferno.
Yep.
And we will talk about the allegory of Dante's Inferno very, very soon. The second, and this one I didn't pick up on, was Alice in Wonderland, which is your favorite book.
I know. I can't believe I didn't pick up on this either. Because actually, to be fair, I will say I've never read the actual book, but anything Alice in Wonderland coded, whether it's like the movie remakes, whether it's the animated series, whether there's an episode of some anime that's done like an Alice in Wonderland adaptation, I'm like, I love Alice in Wonderland. And I don't know how I did not pick up that this was a down the rabbit hole kind of scenario.
Correct.
And when we were reading this, you did say, I think I know why you enjoy this book to an extent. And I'm like, yep, it's hitting the notes of the Alice in Wonderland journey and the whimsy.
Correct. And whimsy is exactly the phrase for it. R.F. Kuang spoke about how she was not trying to reach for a specific atmosphere of hell. She was trying to reach something that she called a textual scaffolding. And she landed on Lewis Carroll because in Wonderland, the ground is never stable. There are no rules. There are no stable reference points. I think this is important to contrast because your experience reading this book was different to mine.
Yes.
I found that the pacing was a bit inconsistent, that it felt like this world was a bit empty and it kind of dragged on a bit.
Yeah.
And also that it was so unusual that things just suddenly happened sometimes. And we saw characters that seemed to do things that you just couldn't really quite conceptualize how they could do.
Yeah. Whereas for me, it didn't bother me, but I do read a lot of whimsy and sort of have a lot of, it maybe could just be a leniency for when something happens in like a fantastical world where the landscape is ever changing. And I'm like, all right, we're just going in this direction.
Correct.
Now, of course, we've come across stories where something happens and you're just like, well, that is really unrealistic.
That doesn't make sense.
Like, you know, there are things that can happen with that, but it is, I think, a leniency in my head where I'm like, yeah, okay, this is what's happening.
Something a bit absurd about all this, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Which I really do find quite interesting and really clever when we're talking about this Frankensteinization of genres, right? The third inspiration that she had for this book was T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland.
Oh, yeah.
And at that point, she was really trying to focus on the moral decay and the depression that T.S. Eliot refers to in his famous poem, The Wasteland, which was set to describe his experiences in the front lines of World War I. So it's probably fair to question whether it's appropriate to, I guess, associate academia with moral decay and depression and hell and a hellscape. And maybe she was, in fact, intending Katabasis to be a bit of a satire because, as we just discussed, the thing of immense value is a bit mundane and quite self-serving.
Also in a world of magic.
Correct. Of all of the things that really matters, you want this recommendation letter when your life would be perfectly fine without one.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a really interesting exploration and a really interesting critique of academia and how absolutely soul-crushing it can be and how myopic it can be when people begin to focus so exclusively on attaining a very specific goal that actually maybe they will never be able to attain. And R.F. Kuang in particular had stated that the idea for the book initially was a cute, silly concept about how academia is hell. And then she stopped and realized, oh no.
Academia is hell.
Correct.
The realization. Yep.
Correct. Here there is an absolutely fantastic article that we will both link in the show notes and that I will extensively quote because, my goodness, this person could not have illustrated this concept better. Estlin Salah is their name. And they wrote for the Michigan Daily and posited or proposed a review of Katabasis. And in the review, they speak about how there are parallels in Katabasis to Dante Alighieri's Inferno, which is about Dante's descent through hell. But here there is a distinctly academic flavor. So both Dante and Kuang have a hell that has 9 circles, and those 9 circles shift from a natural landscape to an architectural landscape. And Estlin particularly asserts that Dante had done this because it represented his version of medieval Florence and the corruption in that society. Similarly, Kuang, they assert, uses this version of hell, these 9 circles of hell, to expose how modern academia reproduces hierarchy, cruelty, and self-delusion under the guise of intellectual pursuit. So hell is literally an academic campus. Yeah. And her hell begins with order, right? You have a library, a student center, a bridge, which then collapses into deserts and mountains and bogs. And then you come to this artificial, hyper-constructed city of Dis. And in this context, Estlin goes on to say that this is a reflection of the psychological arc of academic disillusionment. Students enter believing in the structure, they descend into competition and exploitation, and eventually they confront the cold machinery of the institution itself. Each court then, in Katabasis, whilst taking inspiration from Dante's courts, is very, very, very clearly designed to represent a system in academic circles. You have Pride, which is an infinite library where the work will literally never end.
Yep.
You have Desire, which is a place, I think isn't it supposed to be a dorm room?
I believe it is. It's like dorm room, campus, something where they're all sleeping together.
Correct. And it's quite vulgar and depraved.
It's not a good version of it.
No, it's not sexy at all. It's just want and depravity, really. And Greed is reimagined as this bridge where the bridge itself is composed of souls that had given themselves over.
Yeah.
And then you kind of go on to, I think, Treason, where it's just genuinely a dissertation hall where each of the shades is drafting an argument about why they deserve another chance at life, but no one is going to read their academic thesis. So they're just stuck in this hellscape.
Yeah.
It's pretty dark. And I think what makes it even more so, in my view, is that Alice in each of the different courts has a kind of rotating cast, Estlin would say, of dead academic advisors. So every layer of her descent, Estlin says, comes with a secondary stratum of academic critique, which is very meta-literal and meta-architecture. And here's where I want to come to the crux of a discussion, hopefully, with yourself, Yelena. Because at its core, what Estlin is arguing is that Katabasis is depicting a world where, to quote them, the pursuit of knowledge is inseparable from the systems that gatekeep it. Her hell is a university because the university is already halfway to hell itself. And there's a concept in the story called the Escher staircase. It's an impossible looping stairwell where every ascent is also a descent, which means no amount of effort will ever lead to escape.
Yeah.
And Estlin goes on to talk about how this is a really great metaphor for academia. You'll climb endlessly only to find yourself back where you started. You'll continuously start anew while simultaneously eating yourself as you go.
Yeah.
So I guess I wanted to open a conversation with you. Do you think that that is a fair criticism of academia?
I think it is, but it would depend what academia you go into. Because I think, for example, if you're going into something as complicated as law or being a doctor, it's so hyper competitive, like how this represents. I can imagine that because you're also doing all those extra hours. You know, people get don't get paid,
They get paid pittances
to do
this
all
work.
these extra things and overwork themselves to maybe get a chance at finally being like the top person. Whereas there are clearly other areas that you could study which aren't as intense as that, but it's still always, I think academics is always you're fighting against other people, because at the end of the day, if you don't fight for it, you don't get that spot, but you can also burn yourself out in that process. And I know as I've gotten older and in my career, I'm in a great place in my career, but there is also a point where I go, there's more to life than just my career, which is also why we do this podcast, because we enjoy doing it, and work-life balance is a thing. And I think in this book, I can't remember off the top of my head the name of the character that they run into who committed suicide. Elspeth, thank you. She is a good example of someone who's gone, I'm getting out of this. And she says, like, as part of it, because her hope is still that she's going to make it back somehow, and she's going to be one of the first people back to make it out of hell. And she's just like, I just want to sit on a porch and like have a
cup of tea with a crumpet.
A crumpet with a cup of tea. And she's like, I'm not going back to be this academic person. Why do we want to go through that? Because even in this underworld, all these people are academics because she's around all the academics, and they're all still fighting to somehow still be exactly what they were before they died. And it's like, so you were miserable. You're making yourself miserable in hell so that you can get back to be miserable again?
And they lack the self-awareness to be able to ever break themselves out of that cycle. You know, initially I thought that maybe this book was a bit of an exaggeration. But then if I reflected on my experiences at university, it was not that dissimilar. You did have a hyper-competitive environment with people who were barely getting any sleep, where people were pitted against each other with the Socratic method, and where you never, ever, ever felt like you knew what you were doing. You were constantly on this Escher staircase of like learning, but then coming back and being like, I don't know anything, and starting over again while everyone watches. It's actually quite brutal, the academic system.
It is. And even now, being past the academic side of things, there's still things in my career where I'm like, I still have no certainty. I think we're very much in an era, and I don't actually think it matters what job you are in currently, but job security is a very up in the air scenario. And it's kind of like, I don't know if what I've studied is going to be what I'm going to be doing forever. I don't know if I'm pivoting to something else. I don't know if my contract stays a contract. I don't know if I will still have this full-time job. It's very fluid in what your life is currently.
I think it's a really clever point, because what you're really saying, if you don't mind me putting words in your mouth, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that existential dread that you have when you're at university, where you're like, I just don't know if I'll ever be able to get out of this. Nowadays seems to kind of follow us in our adult life as well.
It does. And like, I think back on my parents and I go, they probably still felt the same thing as well. Like, I don't think it's necessarily like, oh, back in like, say, the boomer generation is, oh, they had it all sorted out. I'm like, no, I think none of us ever have it sorted out. Like, we all never know what we're doing. But there is definitely a difference in like, you know, education used to be free, so you didn't have to think about that. Or jobs were 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. For
expectations were different.
The
right to be offline was different.
Exactly. And now that we have more
inflation as well.
Oh yeah. Like so many other things where it's like, oh, I think I earn enough money, but really, actually, when you compare it to like cost of living and everything that's happening, it doesn't actually add up enough. It's different definitely to other generations, but there'd still be things that like carry over.
So these systems of hyper competition or competitiveness, I should say, these systems of self-criticism, of doubt, these systems of barely being paid enough to be able to keep yourself alive, unfortunately seem to follow quite a large number of people, in fact the majority of people in adulthood these days. That was an interesting segue. Thank you for sharing. So, Yelena, I feel like I have hogged the microphone to talk to you about Dante's Inferno and fantasy novels.
You were very excited.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me. But there's another element to this book, and that is the romance side of it.
It is.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more?
I will, and because I know this confused you a little bit, but it didn't confuse me, which I was quite happy with. But we have something called the prisoner's dilemma, which isn't necessarily a romance dilemma, but it gets developed into this.
And context is that when we saw R.F. Kuang at the Writers' Festival, she made an offhanded joke which kind of stuck with me, and that was the observation that romance was the ultimate prisoner's dilemma. At which point I asked you, tell me what you think about that, because I find that a little bit hard to conceptualize.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
What do you think?
Okay, so I'll explain the original one first. But so it's a logic problem, which basically causes rational individuals' choices to become irrational for a group outcome. So essentially, two perfectly logical people might refuse to cooperate, even when working together clearly is in the best interest for both parties. So you sort of wonder, well, why wouldn't we cooperate then? And it's because this problem forces the individual to choose the best outcome for themselves and not the group. And this is because it introduces the fear of being betrayed.
Yes.
So the classic version of this is, for example, two criminals that are being interrogated by police. And we might see this trope in movies a lot.
Yes.
But basically, the police don't have enough evidence to convict them of the larger crime that they've committed, but they could commit them of like the lesser crimes. So instead they go, hey, if you like dob your partner in, we'll strike a deal.
Okay.
So if, say for instance, you testify against your partner, you go completely free, but then your partner takes the last sentence, for example, 3-year sentence.
Okay.
But if you cooperate with your partner and don't give each other up, you both might have the shorter sentence, which is a year.
Yes.
So you serve a shorter sentence. And in this hypothetical, if you both betray each other, because essentially you've pled guilty to your crimes, you end up with an in-between sentence, which is of 2 years. And so then this is sort of how this works.
Because then the obvious answer would be don't betray your partner, because then you would both just get 1 year.
Correct.
But that in turn requires you to trust your partner, I guess?
Yeah, because the dilemma brings up, I guess, the paranoia and the doubt of like, oh, but what if the other person gives me up? And you want to have your self-preservation instincts really just kick in.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the question is, what if my partner betrays me? So because in this scenario, essentially the best option for you is always to betray your partner. So
because then you go off scot-free.
Exactly. So
interesting.
If you betray them and they don't betray you, you go free. If you betray them and they betray you, you get 2 years. But if you don't betray them and they betray you, you get 3. So overall, the dominant strategy is always to betray. Now, this gets adapted as a romance scenario, which I'm going to say it gets 80% there, because until I looked into this, I realized we're missing something from it. But so in the terms of Katabasis, Alice and Peter are presented with a test from the Weaver Girl. And it's a test of like love and being a couple and like the ultimate loyalty
towards your partner.
Yeah.
And context, the Weaver Girl is one of the monsters that they encounter in hell.
Yes, who's been betrayed by a lover
their
in the
former
past.
lover.
Yeah, and so this is why she has this sort of like test for people. But essentially, they get the choice of choosing a red apple and a green apple. And the red apple is to trust each other, and the green apple is to like deceive each other. And so
if they both pick the red apple, then they both get to go free.
yes.
But if one of them picks the green apple, then the person who chose the green apple gets to go free, and the other one gets like imprisoned.
Yes. So in this terms, the Weaver Girl gets to keep them, and the Weaver Girl basically tortures them and kills them. So it's not a good scenario at the end of it. So and why I say this gets 80% there is because the third scenario where they both betray each other, they both just end up with the Weaver Girl, which doesn't have that middle ground like the original.
Yeah.
So the logic in this one is not as strong, because in originally Alice's idea of why would Peter betray her in this moment, because it's logically both pick the red apple. This Weaver Girl is telling you, I will give you a direct, clean
Safe
path to
through hell.
wherever you want. You can get straight to Grimes, and it's like, okay, well, that's our goal. But she starts getting this self-doubt of, what if Peter betrays me? Because, spoiler for in the book, she believes that Peter is going to sacrifice her at the end.
In order to get a safe passage back to the outer world.
For Grimes, yeah. So do a trade of her soul for Grimes instead. This logic breaks, though, because in order for him to do that, they still have to get past this point.
Yeah.
And for two very logical people,
they act very illogically.
They act very illogically. So this is where there's a bit of a contradiction, because we don't have that third scenario where there's still a betraying is the best option. And so I think that's where this one doesn't quite fit, but I understand where it's trying to come from, because you still have the self-doubt in that. But I think it's trying to be strengthened by the fact that, so Alice gets a tattoo from Professor Grimes, which is a magical sigil inscribed into her skin, which has never been done before or shouldn't be done. It's like inscribed with chalk, and it's a reason why she has a really good memory. She remembers absolutely everything.
But she's also unable to forget anything, right?
Yes, yeah. And so you start to see that in her mind, she sometimes can't differentiate the present from the past and everything. And so for a moment, she has the panic and she can't differentiate, and she ends up picking the green apple and betrays Peter.
Yeah.
Not intentionally meaning to, but that's sort of like the reasoning as to why she does it, which
she kind of loses her sense of self in that moment, right? There's so many thoughts flooding her conscious and subconscious mind at that moment.
So I don't think it's a very strong version of this like sort of paradox, because it doesn't give us the third option, and the reason why she does end up betraying is because she can't quite differentiate between what's happening.
Yeah, so if I play that back, one reason that it's a maybe ill-equipped comparison of the prisoner's paradox is because you lack any middle ground. It's either you're choosing to save or you're choosing to betray.
Yes.
And secondly, because ultimately it's in the prisoner's paradox, or the prisoner's dilemma, I should say, they're quite lucid in that moment. Whereas she doesn't even know who she is, where she is, or what's going on, because as she's getting overwhelmed and panicky, all of these thoughts start flooding her mind. She doesn't even remember picking up the green apple. So it doesn't feel like she has a lot of agency in that betrayal.
Correct.
When it seems to happen entirely by accident.
Yeah.
So that isn't a great example, I think, of the prisoner's dilemma then. I think, what do you think about the idea, though, that romance as a concept is a prisoner's dilemma? Because even if it wasn't necessarily well executed in Katabasis, I think the concept has merits, right?
I think it does too, because I could see where this would go strong, because a lot of like great books or stories about romance are about the betrayal aspect. That's where it hurts the most. And there's the idea of, what is it? Is there ever someone that you can truly trust 100% when in the worst scenario? Correct.
But also, choosing to be in a relationship means choosing to be vulnerable. You're choosing to be a couple versus, and being open to being hurt, versus choosing to leave a person and saving yourself, but also losing out on an opportunity for love, right? So I guess this is one of those instances where it's a nice concept, but a poor execution in the book.
I think so. Because also I think what weakens it a bit more is, this isn't where Peter dies when we mentioned earlier he dies. It's immediately something happens afterwards that saves them and they're out of the scenario, and you kind of go, okay, well, the thing happened, but now they're just out of it anyway. Yeah. So the consequences for it aren't really that strong.
And they're not realized.
Yeah. So we've spoken a lot about the overall plot, different
construct
themes,
of the book.
But we haven't really gotten deep into the characters themselves and their likability. So would you like to start us off with that?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I've spoken to a few different people who have read this book, many of whom didn't like it, not so much because of the pacing issues or because they maybe found the philosophical concepts too dense, although those criticisms were also brought up.
Yeah.
quite a few people I knew disliked the book because they found Alice to be deeply unlikable.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because R.F. Kuang herself alludes to that in that interview at the Writers' Festival. She noted that the first version of Alice was so unlikable, and that was kind of common for a first draft, but that she consciously chose, rather than to soften the bitchiness, to instead offer more interiority. So you try to understand Alice's motivations and her thoughts and her inner monologue more. Look, I wouldn't go so far as to say that I disliked Alice, but I didn't think it was very pleasant to read her internal monologue. She's deeply critical of other people, especially other women. I think R.F. Kuang herself calls Alice a bad feminist. She scorns women who she describes as cloying and affectionate and trying to kind of suck up to Grimes or any other advisor, but then equally knows that there's a need for her to dress a particular way and to act a particular way in order for her to be able to get what she wants. And so it's kind of one rule for her and one rule for other women.
Yeah.
I think she describes herself as having reached this entirely unrealistic, impossible standard of being both, if I'm not misrepresenting this, I think the phrase is imminently fuckable, but also entirely out of reach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is hard, right? She is really unpleasant towards other people. She's really unpleasant towards other women. She has this compulsive need to achieve, and she will do and stop at nothing to get what she wants.
Yeah.
How did you find her?
See, I didn't feel like the same way towards her. And again, it could be because I've listened to the audio. So there's definitely things that you get from audiobooks because someone is playing the character and it can be represented a different way. But I think because like the system that she is brought up in and that she's in, to me, it made sense as to the way she was and the competitiveness. And there were still like other characters in there doing the same thing as her. So it's like, you know, a dog-eat-dog world sort of scenario where she's like, I've got to still play this system.
I've got to survive.
Yeah, I got to survive. And I think there were little like nuanced moments where you get bits of her, because I'd forgotten about this, like how she used to go like bouldering and stuff. And like she did do things with people. And even when she tried to meet up with Peter originally.
She was trying to be his friend.
And she was trying to be his friend and she got stood up multiple times. And so there's parts there that it's like she tried with certain things to be a bit more human. But then a lot of things stopped her from being human.
Yeah.
And maybe in her head she could get through all of this, just got to get through this, like we all think we got to just get through this part of our life.
Yeah, correct.
And then afterwards I get, you know, this recommendation and then I'll be set and I can maybe be a woman who changes things in society or in the academic world, because we're also at the cusp where women weren't allowed to do these kinds of academia degrees, and I'm pretty sure she's on like the cusp of like being allowed to do this from what I remember.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense you get in the book that women face a glass ceiling of some kind. And there are different examples that they show that manifest that glass ceiling.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
So like there's also that where it's like, oh, I could complain about things or I could do this, but I
could
also
just try
have
to survive in the system.
Also have to stay in my lane to make sure I get to that next level, because there are women above her that she's seen have achieved it, so she's trying to get to that as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so I wonder whether it's fair to say that if you don't see Alice as a character but rather as a plot device, to kind of talk about, or I guess as a very, very, very obvious metaphor for the destructive nature of unfettered ambition, then she's more palatable, if nothing else. You can understand her behavior a bit more.
I think so. And I guess I'll pitch this to you. If Alice was a guy, would we see Alice as different?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting question. It's one that I brought up at a book club recently, that I wonder if we have an implicit desire for women in particular, or female characters in particular, to be more likable.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, some of that own internalized misogyny that we all kind of carry. The example that comes to mind to me, and this is really one for our audience, right? Because I don't know that there is a right or a wrong, but I'm curious to get to canvas different thoughts and perspectives. If we go back to some of the tried and true stories that we know everyone is, or the vast majority of people have read, Draco Malfoy is a character who is ruthlessly ambitious, incredibly self-serving, who's horrendous and horrific in the way he treats people.
Yeah.
But the number of fan fictions I've seen out there that try to give him grace and give him nuance and give him depth really goes to show that maybe we hold women to a different standard to men, right? Why don't we give her the same kind of grace, do you think?
I mean, the previous review that we'd done was a Hermione adaptation.
That's true. That's true.
And there is that thing where you go, do we like the character? Are we trying to give them some sort of likability? I think Alice as a character could easily, if someone fan fictioned this story or her, could be made into like, oh, well, here's the backstory behind it, and like here's more about it, and like the drive, and I don't know. You also like develop things into being like, oh, they're sexier than they are, and there's like other things that make you go, oh, it's okay that they do this thing, you know? Because even like Professor Grimes as a character gets away with a whole bunch of crap.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
People idolize him, and we do find out in the story he is awful.
He's genuinely awful.
Absolutely awful.
You know, it's interesting. It kind of lends to this idea that with characters like Draco Malfoy, because the story is entirely in Harry's perspective, there is a lot of ambiguity and unknown about his motivations for why he does what he does. And that allows us to kind of fill in the gaps with whatever
Fancy.
softening, whatever softening narrative or complex backstory we think makes him more redeemable.
Yeah.
And maybe it's hard in the case of Alice because we are given so much interiority by design, by R.F. Kuang. We know exactly what she's thinking and what she's motivated by. And that makes it difficult to kind of fill in those gaps with something that makes her more nuanced or likable or anything like that.
I think also because of the whole she can remember absolutely everything, and that does get peppered in nicely throughout the book until you finally discover why, because for a while you think, does she have some sort of disorder? Like you think something else might be wrong with her until you go, oh no, it's the magical tattoo that is actually destroying her brain because she can't forget anything. And I think maybe partially that could also not be helping with the likability as well.
Agree, because if we come back full circle to this idea of her betraying Peter, right, which is really a good example of how unlikable Alice may be ostensibly perceived as.
Yeah.
It does come down to the fact that some of her decisions seem utterly irrational and they don't seem to be grounded in any kind of cogent story or narrative of who we think she should be, right?
Yeah.
What I do find most redeeming about Alice, and maybe it's because I see her more as a plot device than I do as a character, is that she is a really good example of how a person is shaped by the environment that they're in, right? And Alice in particular, at the end of the book, you know, if we go back to this idea of the hero's journey, she does come back transformed because she does choose to do that really painful work of interrogating what is actually important and what it means to live. And I think that that's quite profound. If I go back to that incredible Michigan Daily review, once again, it will absolutely be posted. They have this beautiful quote where they say that Alice's return is not just triumphant, but deliberate. She chooses to seek connection rather than isolation, and she chooses to value the world outside scholarly ambition. And in a place that is built to devour her, Alice chooses to rebuild herself. And in that sense, Kuang's hell gestures towards, direct quotes these are, to a quiet, stubborn, but worthwhile discipline of remembering how and why to live. And if nothing else, that is a reason to like Alice.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we've hit that time where we start to go into our ratings, and we're doing something a little bit different this time because of how complex this book is. We're going to give a bit more context as to what our ratings are. Now, we rate in a couple different categories each time to give a bit of fairness to our rating system. We're not going to go into too much detail because we have before, so we're just going to jump straight into it. But Sam, so first off, plot strength, which is more about how strong is the story beyond its genre, what did you rate it?
I struggled with this one. I went back and forth a lot on how I would rate the strength of this plot. I initially gave it a 1, then I gave it a 4. Now I'm landing on a 3.
Yeah.
There are elements of it that I can't deny that I found frustrating, right? Especially when we started to go through the logic puzzles and the philosophical concepts and the idea of magic being a paradox. This could just be because it had started to reach a point where it was beyond my ability to understand it. That, particularly as we discussed with the Alice in Wonderland concept, it felt like stuff just happened.
Yeah.
And I was just supposed to accept that stuff just happened. And I started skimming through most of those philosophical concepts. I also accept that part of this is because Alice's brain is meta-literally so full because of the sigil on her arm, right?
Yeah.
And her protagonist's head is so crammed full of references and it's overwhelming. And so the book is as well, right? But nevertheless, I still did think that there had to be a bit more of a balance that we found between showing the volume of research and thinking that underpinned this book and making it accessible.
Yeah.
And I'm not the only person. I know that, in fact, I will link you to another reviewer who spoke about the fact that there's a bit of controversy around Katabasis because you've got kind of two camps, right? The first camp is saying, look, at the end of the day, we should not write a book that's so complex that the average reader can't understand it. And then on the other hand, you've got people who are saying, well, if you didn't understand it, maybe that's an indication of your reading skills.
Yeah.
And this kind of becomes this weird anti-intellectualism debate that I'm really not interested in getting into too much in this latter half of the podcast episode.
Yeah.
But I think it's complicated, right? We want a book to be more accessible to people, which means we need to think about the structural issues that make it difficult to comprehend.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, we have to be able to engage critically. It's valuable to learn something. It's valuable to challenge ourselves. I don't know. I'm going to go bang down the middle and say 3.
Yeah. I understand where you're coming from because I've also gone back and forth with this as well, and I've also given it a 3 like you, but I think my reasoning is a bit different because listening to the audio, like the information's being given to me, so I never necessarily have to skim through anything. And while there were things that I went, I'd really have to look at this logic puzzle to go, is that actually how the logic works?
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm just going, I'm trusting that what you're telling me is correct, because in other aspects of the book with things that I did understand. For example, she describes bouldering for a bit for Alice, and as a boulderer myself, the details she went into it, I kind of went, you've actually gone quite nicely. You've thought about this. So my assumption is for the rest of it, you've also thought about the things as well. So I've gone to that slight acceptance of it, which might be my whole Alice in Wonderland love, and I'll accept some of the whimsy. So that didn't bother me too much, but I can understand that it was a bit difficult to follow absolutely everything without maybe going into your own research into it.
But do you think that there are also some things that aren't explained but should have been explained? Like, how was the cat able to go in and out of hell?
Oh, right? I mean, actually, I have a better one. So when Alice falls into the Lethe, and obviously she doesn't lose her memory because of the tattoo, Peter does touch her for part of it and pull her out, and she's wet with Lethe water, but him even touching it doesn't affect him.
Yeah,
and you're sort of like, okay, well, didn't we just say even a drop of this stuff could affect you in some way?
And change your identity.
He's now touched her and he might lose a memory, and they're not worried about that whatsoever. So there are definitely things that you're like, oh, okay, that's just a little bit maybe too convenient, didn't really work.
And I feel like if we're already going to take 590 odd pages to talk about this story, there are a lot of loose threads that we really just should have tied up, right? Like, where was Grimes? At the end of the day, the point was for us.
I don't know.
Was for us to figure out which court of hell he was going to end up in. Was he pride? Was he lust? Was he wrath?
Yeah.
We never find out.
Actually, I will say the end plot, and again, spoilers for this, is she was just like, so why didn't you wait for me at the beginning? So apparently he was manipulating her from his side, giving her like the dreams and ideas to come into hell,
Into the underworld.
Come to him. And she's like, so why didn't you just wait at the beginning?
Correct.
If you were there the whole time and you knew I was coming. And
Correct.
the idea is that he's like, well, I knew you'd follow me. And it's like, but even then, where have you been and how did you get through these things? And did
Correct.
you get stuck in a
Because
court
each of these courts is supposed to be sequential. How did you get to the end?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he technically didn't because he gets pulled from wherever he was.
That's true.
But it's like, so did you just go to the first one and get stuck? Like,
Correct.
There's none of that explained. And
Well, there's also another one where we find out that Peter had made a mistake when he was thinking about how he could come back from hell without dying, and then ultimately decides to sacrifice himself to allow Alice to go back safely.
Yeah.
How was Alice going to come back without him? Before we knew that Peter was joining her in hell?
Yeah.
What was her plan?
She really just jumped the gun and went in. Even the logic of, I realized the chalk and no one questioning whether the magic chalk works in hell, and then they find out it doesn't.
Correct.
Unless you mix it with your own blood, which is a different thing. But
correct.
There are some things there. And
even at the ending, when she says that she was going to trade Grimes's soul for Peter's, Grimes is already dead. What is she trading here?
Yeah, I was kind of like, okay, he's just kind of accepting that you're doing this and like letting you do it. And I'm kind of like, okay, I guess if Lord Yama wants to, sure.
Yeah, and maybe this comes back again to stuff just happens and you have to be okay with it, but
yeah,
maybe there's too much suspension of disbelief for me here.
I think like I enjoyed a lot of aspects of the books and I enjoy whimsy and all that. I think the book in itself, when you think of like middle, beginning and end and just like the arc that happens, I think is actually not that grand at the end of the day. And so that's where I think this book
maybe the ending fell flat.
Well, I think just like overall, just kind of like, okay, Professor dies, go to hell, find Professor in hell. Decide not to save Professor, get out of hell. Like, it's very not as complicated as some of the other books that we've read, and that's why it was easier to describe. But that part, I'm like, okay, and relationships together aren't as strong, which we'll talk about in a sec. But so overall, I'm like, it's a 3 because I enjoyed parts of it, but also the main plot, I guess, isn't really the biggest plot in the world.
It's not very strong.
Yeah.
There are too many holes, I think. So, now that we're talking about characters and character design, to what extent did you have an emotional impact because of these characters? Do you care what happened to any of them? So, I think I didn't care so much what happened to them, and this could be because like I come from definitely reading a lot of romance stuff and dark romance where I'm used to the characters being attached at the hip somehow. I mean, I was actually more invested in Archimedes the cat and making sure the cat wasn't going to die. Yeah.
You know, and like at the end of the day, I wanted Alice to get there, you know, to get to Grimes. And once we got a bit more information about the history of Peter and why it seemed like he was, you know...
the way that he was.
The way that he was.
Flaky.
I was like, when he does end up sacrificing himself and we have the moment where Alice is gone and he can hear him literally being tortured, I'm like... Oh, that really sucks because also up until this point, Alice had betrayed him with the apple. Alice had done some shitty things, and to him, in his mind, he's like...
He still chose to save her.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm not a shitty person, and her interpretation of him, like, it's just different points of views, and he's not actually a bad person, really, at all. Might be a little bit dumb about, like, what he's doing, and, like, you know, not socially aware, but he didn't deserve to... be tortured and bled to death, essentially.
So what I'm hearing is that you did have an emotional response to these characters, or at least certainly to Peter.
Yeah.
How much of that do you think was because you read the audiobook, though?
So the audio is actually really interesting. So we've got 2 narrators. So we've got Murdoch Sims, who narrates most of the book. Now, she does all the voices for everyone, which is interesting because we do have Will Watt, who is a male voice actor, and you'd think, well, wouldn't he do the males normally or chapter by chapter? Yeah. But instead, he does all of like the overall explanation of when they start talking about like history of like, you know, magic and science, and he does those sort of things.
Kind of an omniscient narrator?
Yeah. But otherwise, the main narrator, she's actually very good because she has her voice for I guess, the overall narration, then she puts it on for all the different characters. And she does actually a very good job, which is normally usually jarring for a female to do both men and women. But I think it's actually a very well narrated book for what it is with that. And I quite enjoyed it and enjoyed her interpretation of the characters.
Yeah, okay.
Which also could be why maybe Alice was more likable to me and things like that. But something that was really interesting that I haven't had in an audiobook happen yet is that it's either last chapter or two, once Peter is brought back to life, the male voice actor takes over for doing any of the male voices, including Lord Yama.
Yeah, okay.
So I was like, that's an interesting, I guess, choice, and there must be something behind it. And I sort of interpret it as, so far we've been in Alice's head the whole time.
Yeah.
Alice has had, the thing with the memory, that she can't forget anything. And so everything's from her point of view and really restricted to what she's assuming of the world. And now that she's brought Peter back and she doesn't have the sigil anymore and she's accepted what she actually wants sort of in life and they're going back up to the surface world, I'm kind of like, maybe that was the choice for bringing in the other voice actor to now open it up to being, it's not just her sort of like interpretation.
So it's now them together as a couple. She's had the ability to open herself up.
Yeah, like I'm sure there's some nuance in the art form of that choice, and I'm curious as to what that was. Maybe even her opening up to Peter or something. But so like for me, I'd given like the character design and stuff a 3 because I can't say I didn't care what happened to them, and I did enjoy the characters themselves.
Interesting. This really might come down to the difference between audio versus written, or just individual personality, really. Yeah. But I gave it a 1. I felt like the characters themselves were great as vehicles to explain the story, and they were excellent literary devices. But as fully fleshed, 3-dimensional characters, not that compelling.
Yeah, which is fair, and I can completely understand that. And again, it could just be, voice actors doing their job a real good way and everything. But what about our themes, tropes, plot devices? How do you think they're used? Are they used well? What would you rate it?
We spent almost the full hour talking about just the complexity of the story, the different ideas that she was bringing in, the way she was using and leveraging existing kind of Katabasis like Dante's Inferno, but then putting such an interesting contemporary satirical lens to it. I have to give her a 4, if not a 5. I think the only thing that would hold me back from it being a 5 was because you quite rightly pointed out that at times the plot devices didn't really land as well as they could.
Yeah.
I would also, and that's particularly in the context of the Weaver Girl, I would also give it a 4 only because while I think that they are actually really, really well done, it was only because I had listened to her lecture that I even thought of them in the first place. Like I actually didn't pick up the Alice in Wonderland reference. I didn't pick up the Frankenstein of different genres together.
Yeah.
And so here I think there's a difference between your intention versus your execution.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
What about you?
I gave it a 4 as well, and a lot of similar aspects to you. And I think because when we've talked about tropes in like a lot of other books that we've reviewed, sometimes there are ones that just make you go, oh God, and none of that really happened with this. I was like, I think it was
no immediate red flags.
Exactly. It was very well thought out with a lot of what I'm going to classify as a trope and not necessarily like other things that have happened in it. So it was a 4 for me as well.
Amazing. Finally, chemistry between characters. Not necessarily romantic or carnal chemistry. We can talk about chemistry between Alice and Archimedes, for instance, or Alice and Grimes. How do you feel these characters interacted with each other?
So I gave this a very low scoring, and this is where things dip down for me, because like while I liked the characters themselves, I don't necessarily think they intertwined well enough, but that again could be this whole Alice point of view strictly thing.
Yeah.
Now they mention Archimedes, I'm kind of like, yeah, she had a little bit of a fun sort of thing with the cat, but the cat does just kind of turn up whenever it is convenient. And I don't think really Alice had much of a connection with Peter, even after everything. There's not enough there to build on their relationship. With Professor Grimes, it is just very much an awful relationship. And I gave everything sort of a 1 because I don't think, to me, it didn't feel like any of the characters really connected to each other. They just sort of
they just existed.
Yeah.
See, I was going to give this a 1 because I already said I thought the characters were just two-dimensional vehicles, right, to explain complex ideas. I actually bumped it up to a 2 because I thought there was a beautiful interaction at the end between Elspeth and Alice. Now, again, minor spoilers, Alice, unsurprisingly, treats Elspeth pretty badly, and she tries to betray Elspeth. This is the girl who had committed suicide and was trying to give them some safe passage through hell. But Elspeth comes back to save her, and they have this really wonderful interaction throughout the book where Elspeth feels like an older version of Alice, a more mature version of Alice, the one who has understood the cost of this relentless pursuit of success.
Yeah.
And the way Alice eventually learns to connect with Elspeth, Elspeth's ultimate sacrifice in allowing Alice to be the one to get out of hell free, and she, I think, turns into this beautiful set of butterflies. I thought that was really well done, and it showed a lot of growth, both in those characters as individuals, but also in how they engaged as a couple, for want of a better word. So I gave it a 2.
Okay, so I've just done the math on that one, and that leads us to a 2.1 out of 5.
I was not expecting that.
No, but I think every time we do this, because once we actually break it down into our specific rating system, this is where it can change a book that, like I say, I quite enjoyed into a lower rating because it's between two different individuals, audio versus written, and then also just what actually breaks down a good book. But in saying that, did we have any red flags for this book?
No, and I guess this is where it's hard, right? Because she's clearly a very well-seasoned author, which means I think the book is constructed reasonably well. Really, where I think the failing is in that sort of character design, development, and relatability thing. Which is interesting because I previously also said that I don't think we should judge her for not being a very likable character, but evidently that still brings down the rating of this book.
Yeah, but because it's not even necessarily, oh, is she a likable character? But we're also like, okay, but her compared to her relationship with other characters and their relationships to her, it builds on different criteria. So while the book, I agree, is constructed very well and it's very smart, it just in the end doesn't overall rate
very compelling.
The best. Yeah, exactly.
Yikes. I was hoping and expecting that to be a higher rating. Oh well. Next time?
Next time, maybe. We'll see what it is.
Well, I would like to thank all of our listeners, both for their patience with us as we took an extended hiatus, and for joining us for this edition, or episode, I should say, of Red Flags and our review of Katabasis by R.F. Kuang. If you made it all the way to the end, we cannot thank you enough for your support, and we hope you loved it. If you've got a book you'd like us to tackle next, or your own thoughts on Katabasis, then please drop us a comment because we'd love to hear from you.
And you can find Red Flags wherever you listen to your podcasts, and follow us on our TikTok and Instagram at Red Flags. That's READ Flags. See you next time.